So in this lesson, it's A2. We're going to talk about the state today and kind of get the idea of what characteristics make up a state and define it, I guess is the best way to put it. So when we hear the word state, living in the United States of America, we think of, Indiana or Illinois or, Wyoming, whatever. But when we look at it from a political science point of view or a governmental point of view, actually, with a state, we're looking at a different kind of entity altogether because while the United States is made up of 50 different states, I guess technically by definition, they're really provinces because there's four characteristics of a state, and our 50 states don't meet all four of those characteristics. So we're going to kind of go through these characteristics today and kind of explain why our 50 states aren't a state and what actually is. And so from a governmental point of view, when we talk about a state, we're talking about a group of people that live within a defined territory that function with a particular form of government, and they have the ability to control their own destiny through something called sovereignty. And we have in the world today, the United Nations recognizes, I believe it's 196 states. The United States only recognizes 195 states. The conflict being over whether or not Palestine in Israeli territory is truly a state or is not. And according to our government, Palestine doesn't qualify as a state. But be that as it may, we need to go through, what makes a state, because every state in the world possesses four characteristics, and those characteristics can be very different from one state to another. And we can talk about them right here. The first characteristic is a population. So clearly to be a state, you have to have people. And the size of that population, though, has nothing to do with the existence of the state. So, for example, we have some very small states in the world like San Marino, which is a small enclave in Italy, or the Vatican City, which is a country inside of Rome, or Monaco on the coast of France, Andorra between Spain and France in the Pyrenees Mountains, or Liechtenstein between Switzerland and Austria. These little micro-states, in Singapore, in the east, these areas don't necessarily have a great population, but they do have people who happen to live there. And, the Vatican, being the smallest state in the world with about a population of about 500 people, they still have civilians or citizens who happen to live within their particular population. Now, China, on the other hand, almost 2 billion people happen to live there, and they have their own population as well. And the thing is, with the state, the population doesn't have to be a particular group. They're not necessarily homogeneous. They can be heterogeneous, where they have many different aspects or characteristics that make them up. And so, for example, we might say something is a nation, and therefore it's probably going to have a homogeneous population. You think about like the Indian nations that live on reservations in the United States of America, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chiricahua, the Sioux, the Lakota Sioux, the Dakota Sioux. They're all of a homogeneous population. Or the Navajo in Arizona is a good example. They have a huge reservation that takes up a large part of the state of Arizona. And they are not a state, they are a nation. They are the nation of the Navajo. And so we may think of ourselves as Americans, but we know that there's a great diversity in the people who happen to live within our state. And that state is the United States of America. Now, those people have to live somewhere, and so just because you can't have a state without people, you can't have a state without territory, and that territory has to have known and recognized boundaries. For the United States, we have the Atlantic Ocean in the east and the Pacific Ocean in the west, and the border we have with Canada to the north, and to the south, the border we have with Mexico, and then the Gulf of Mexico, that make up the boundaries of the contiguous 48 states. Now, Alaska being on the northwestern side of Canada, Hawaii of course, being in the Pacific Ocean, as well as Puerto Rico as a territory, and then the territories that we have in the Pacific, like Guam and the Marianas Islands and so forth. And so we think about like the small country of the Vatican in Rome. It's the world's smallest state, and it has a population of 500 people, and it might cover 100 acres of ground. So it's not very big, but it's enough to still qualify as a particular state. And so we think of, for example, like Palestine. Israel doesn't necessarily recognize Palestine as having its own land. It may have its own people, but not by not having its own territory. It really doesn't fit, as we would see it, the definitions of a state. Now, other countries feel differently. The largest country in the world, as far as territory goes, is Russia. They have if you like took the landmass of Russia and folded it around a ball. Or by square miles, it would be the same size as the dwarf planet Pluto. So there's enough surface area in Russia to make it something that could be characterized in the solar system. The third aspect is a characteristic is sovereignty, and that's something that can kind of get confusing. And this is where a state can determine its own course, its own destiny. So, like for many of you, if you're under the age of 18, you live in your parents' home, you're students in school, therefore you're under the direction of your parents, and you're not a sovereign being because mom and dad or your guardian can dictate what happens within your life. So legally, you're limited into what you can do. You can't sign contracts. You have to have co-signers. You may have to, you can't vote. You can't take part in certain aspects of our government. So therefore, you're not sovereign. Now, when you turn 18 legally, in a sense, then you do become a sovereign individual. States are the same way. A sovereign state has its ability to control its own power, make its own laws, conduct foreign policy with other countries. And so therefore that sovereignty, it's dictated by the aspects of our Constitution and then the laws created by our Congress. And then that takes us to the fourth characteristic, and that fourth characteristic, of course, is government. And a state can't exist without a particular structure. That structure, of course, is its ability to control its own public policies, as we talked about in Section A1. So you have to have those processes taken care of. You have to have the personnel to control the government, the branches of government. It can be a dictatorship. It could be a monarchy. It could be a democracy. It could be a republic. It can be an oligarchy or a plutocracy, all these other fancy terms. But when it comes down to it, you do have to have some form of government in order for the state to be qualified. So, let's look at it like this. The United Nations, does it have a territory? No. But does it have a government? Yeah, it has the ability to draft resolutions. Is it sovereign? Well, the membership allows it to determine its own form of government, and it's a parliamentary form of government. Does it have a population? Well, there's no citizenship of the United Nations. So therefore, the United Nations wouldn't qualify as a state. Same thing with the European Union. The European Union is made up of individual states. There is a European Union government. There's a degree of sovereignty, but there's the lack of a population, a lack of territory that keeps it from being a state. Let's talk about Illinois. Is Illinois a state on the world stage? Well, we have a government. We have a boundary. We have territory. We have Illinois citizens. But one thing that the state of Illinois doesn't have is sovereignty, because Illinois can't go out into the world and, for example, conduct treaties with foreign powers. We can't go to Cuba and say, hey, we want you to, specifically buy Illinois agricultural products and things of that sort. The American federal government can say, nope, because we're going to have an embargo on Cuba. So therefore, Illinois, you can't conduct that business. And Illinois has to say, okay. And because of that lack of sovereignty, they're not a state either, even though under our system, we call them states. It's really a province, much like, Manitoba or Ontario in Canada. They're part of a federal system. The federal system is like a cake. Cakes are like ogres, and ogres are like onions. But anyway, they have layers. And so the top layer is the federal government, the national government. That second layer underneath it is the state government in our system, or provincial system, provinces in Canada. And then underneath that layer is local, municipal, county, school boards, library boards. Those things are underneath all that as well. And so we have a tiered system of layers, which is called federalism. And because of federalism, states like Montana or Illinois or New Jersey can't go out and act on the world stage. And so, therefore, hey, you know what? You might call yourself that, but you're really not. And so we have to have these four characteristics in order for a state to be truly recognized. We have origins of, or theories on the origins of states, and there's four of those. I'm not going to cover them right now, but we'll talk in greater depth of how population, territory, and sovereignty and government impact those theories and how states came to be. And we'll look forward to that in A3.